everyone, it's Ashley with Southern Sewing Company. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're learning how to free motion meander quilt. And whether you are brand new to this design or if you know a little bit, I'm sharing how to and some tips to get the perfect meandering line. So as always, you need your free motion quilting foot and your feed dogs in the drops position to be able to free motion quilt. If you aren't sure which foot will work with your machine, check the manual for your sewing machine. You can easily find that in a Google search online. You can also check out the Beginner Quilting Series Part 6, and I will leave a link in the description box below if you're looking for an introduction to free motion quilting. Let's get started. Before we get started on the sewing machine, I always recommend that you, even if you are not a beginner, if you're more advanced, grab a piece of paper and a pen. And this is going to help your body develop the muscle memory before you move to your sewing machine, and it'll help create a more fluid design. So for the meandering line, there are a few things to remember. Number one is our meandering line is always moving. It is continuously this wiggly line that moves in all directions. And if we were to continue it in one direction, it's not going to be a meandering line. It's just going to be a wiggly line. So tip number one is continuously move and wiggle your line. And you're also going to always be moving in different directions. So I might move to the right and then down and then over and back, to the right, down, up, and then move to the left. It's always continuously moving and then in different directions. The next tip that I can give you is to visually imagine something while you're drawing. So for me, this is gonna sound a little funny, but I always imagine the end of a bone, like a cartoon bone, when I'm doing some of these curves, and that's just what my brain goes to. I don't know why. You can also think of a winding river or a winding road, but that visualization kind of helps you keep consistent curves and not kind of make this zigzag pattern. Once we kind of get the hang of visualizing our meandering line, the next thing that we really need to strive for is keeping a consistent distance between our quilted lines. And I'm not doing a super good job because I'm having to pick my pen up, which when you're quilting, you will not do that. So the next tip for a meandering line to keep things looking consistent overall is to maintain the distance between your lines as you quilt. So overall, I'm keeping about 1/4 to 1/2 inch between my quilted lines. So for example, as I'm coming around this curve and coming here, I know that I want to go back to the left. So I'm not gonna stitch all the way back to this quilted line because it's not gonna keep that consistent stitch length in between. So I'm going to stop about there, move up, move down, again, not moving down too close to this line, and then kind of keeping a continuous movement as I go up and around and keep my dog bone curves moving consistently around my area to fill it in. I also think it's important to kind of stay on track with your previous quilted designs, because if not, you're gonna have this empty space in the middle that you're gonna have to come back and fill in, which is a little bit frustrating when you've made your way around an entire quilt. I'm gonna finish this design and I'm going to scan it and upload to my most recent blog post, which you'll find a link in the description box below, if you would like to print this out and trace over my lines to kind of get a feel for how I've, kind of set up this meandering line for you. Another thing to keep in mind, which is really cool about this design, is you can take it and you can scale it way down. Let me grab another piece of paper and I will show you. So you can take this design and you can do like a micro meandering line, which essentially is just an even smaller distance in between your quilted design. So as you can see, the lines in between are significantly smaller than the last one. So you can scale this way down as opposed to kind of this medium density, or conversely, you could do this really big. If you wanted to get through a quilting really fast and you did not want any kind of dense quilting. so here we are again. This really actually does look like a river. So these lines in between each other are roughly consistent. They might not be absolutely perfect, but they're pretty close. Next, we're gonna hop over to my sewing machine. So I've got my handy dandy quilting gloves, and I am quilting on a Baby Lock Jane today, which is my absolute favorite. It is just a regular sewing machine. It's not anything fancy, it's just a straight stitch machine. So I have sped up my quilting by 2 times just to kind of keep things moving throughout the video. And I'm gonna get started on the edge of my quilt, or on the edge of the space that I'm working from. And I'm gonna start doing this wiggling line that kind of travels in one direction for a minute. And then I'm gonna start moving towards the left and back down and around. And here you can see my little bone designs and my free-flowing river that I've kind of started imagining. When I get tired of going in one direction, I'm gonna turn and go in the next direction. And the idea here is to fill in space as I go, and I don't wanna leave big gaps because I know in my head that I have to go back and fill those in, which is frustrating when you realize you left out a big spot and you're finishing your quilt. So move kind of in a way that makes sense for you and fluidly just kind of keep working around your quilt. Keep the spacing thing in mind. I know I keep stressing this, and it gets easier as you practice more. Grab a scrap fabric like you see here and just kind of start moving and see where your hands go. If you get stuck somewhere, stop and look around and kind of plan your route before you just keep sewing into or crossing over other quilted lines. We are finished with our meandering line, and I love that it creates this texture for whatever space that we're working in. And in order to keep it consistent, remember to try to keep the spacing between your quilted lines the same, or as close to the same as possible. If you had huge gaps, that's going to be pretty noticeable when you're looking at it. But again, this design is not about perfection. It really is meant to have this organic feel. So don't forget, you can check the description box below for a link to this week's blog post where you can download this as a free PDF if you'd like to kind of trace along with the way that I do things, or feel free to create your own. So here's a quick recap of what we learned about the meandering line. Number 1, continuously wiggle your line. The key to a beautiful meandering stitch is to keep the line moving, avoid sharp angles or sudden stops, and just gently wiggle your quilt in smooth curves. Number 2, maintain consistent spacing. I know I have stressed this the entire video, but it's very important, and one of the biggest challenges for beginners is keeping that even spacing between lines. Keep changing directions. To achieve an organic and flowing look, make sure you're changing directions regularly. For me, I will usually take 2 squiggles and then switch directions. If your meandering lines start to look too uniform or repetitive, try making a larger curve or kind of varying your motion. Last step is to practice, practice, practice. You see me write this and talk about this all the time, but it's so important. Free motion quilting is all about muscle memory. The more you practice, the more natural your movements become. Try doodling. You can even use these scrap pieces of fabric like I am to do a quilt sandwich and kind of help train your hands and eyes to work together for smoother quilting. If you learned something new in this tutorial, give it a thumbs up because it can help other beginner quilters just like you find this video. Consider subscribing because each week I'm sharing new quilting and hand embroidery tips and tutorials. Don't forget, comment below if you have any questions, if you'd like to say hey, or find me on Instagram at Southern Sewing Company. Thanks, y'all.